We're seeing people like Steve Bannon, a lot of really prominent Republican figures say, there has to be more to this story. The FBI has to be covering something up. Nevertheless, I think the Trump administration is very focused on the goal here, which is using this as sort of a pretext to do some kind of like Viktor Orban style crushing of left-wing institutions.
I'm John Favreau, and you just heard from the Bulwark's Will Sommer, who I talked to earlier today about Charlie Kirk, the right's reaction to the assassination, and some of the theories that have been racing around the internet. But I want to start today's show with a longer open about how I've been processing the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination. So I've said a few different places now that Kirk's murder really rattled me. Part of the reason, at least initially, had to do with the fact that he was killed doing what we've all done for years, answering questions about politics at public events. But what's honestly rattled me more has been the reaction. I can't say I was completely surprised by the White House response. Our government was already planning a campaign to cripple progressive organizations. They've already cracked down on free speech. I mean, they grabbed an international student off the street, threw her in the back of a van, and locked her in hellish conditions because she co-wrote an op-ed in the school newspaper. They raided the house of a former senior White House official after he went on TV and said things that made the president mad. And there are now at least a dozen other investigations into people on his enemies list. They've got military patrolling our streets, masked agents tearing people away from their families and saying they'll bring them back if they're good. They're ignoring due process, court orders, threatening judges with impeachment, threatening to bankrupt media companies and universities. The government crackdown on free speech and civil liberties has clearly been accelerated by Kirk's assassination. But it's been happening for months now. They didn't need much of a pretext because they never really bothered with a subtext. But what's really alarming to me is the intensity of the rage they're directing not towards the person who murdered Charlie Kirk, but towards the political opposition, which includes millions and millions of Americans, which includes us. And it's not just coming from MAGA influencers and activists and supporters either. It's coming from the President of the United States, the Vice President, the Attorney General, the most powerful people in government. Trump says the left is evil and hateful. Stephen Miller says Democrats are a domestic extremist group. J.D. Vance just used the term terrorist sympathizer to describe a liberal writer who wrote a piece he didn't like that explicitly condemned political violence. I think we're in a very bad place right now. I feel like we've been there for a while, and I imagine a lot of you have felt like that too. The last year has been scary and exhausting and infuriating. Not only has no one come to save us, no one's really offered a coherent plan to fight back. And then Charlie Kirk gets assassinated by a kid who believed his political views and rhetoric were so hateful and harmful that he deserved to die. I understand the impulse that's led people on the left to embrace a steady stream of theories on social media that suggest the killer is really a right-wing Groyper or a disturbed nihilist or someone whose only motive was concern for his partner who is trans. Or maybe the text messages between the killer and his partner were fabricated, which is the latest conspiracy circulating among some very online libs. But the most likely explanation, by far, is one I think we should reckon with. That, according to what his mother told police, Tyler Robinson had become more political and left-leaning over the last year. And that according to his texts, he'd had enough of Charlie Kirk's hatred and killed him because, quote, some hate can't be negotiated out. Now, I haven't had any interactions with anyone who is celebrating or justifying Kirk's murder, though I have unfortunately seen some of the viral posts and videos, which I find repulsive. I felt the same way watching a crowd of people cheering the other day after a judge dropped 2 criminal counts against Luigi Mangione, who believed that a health insurance company's decisions were so harmful that its CEO deserved to die with a bullet in his back. But I have had a number of interactions with people on the left, some of whom were listeners, that have also rattled me. I've read a lot of messages that start with, he didn't deserve to die, but... I've seen people equate the harm that comes from hateful words or repressive policies with the harm that comes from extinguishing another human life. I've heard people argue that because America has always been a violent country, maybe we're getting closer to the point where political violence is necessary in the face of an authoritarian regime. After all, We fought a violent revolution to win our independence. We fought a violent civil war to end slavery. Maybe if enough Germans had engaged in political violence before Hitler's fascist regime took power, we could have avoided World War II. I want to persuade you that this is horseshit. Targeted assassinations and acts of political violence are not like wars fought with armies. For one, they are rarely successful in bringing about anything but more death, disorder, and repression. I would bet that the tens of millions of Americans who've died in war and the families they left behind would have traded anything for one last chance to fight for a political solution instead. Dr. King was absolutely right when he told us that violence never brings permanent peace. It solves no social problem. It merely creates new and more complicated ones. King's civil rights strategy wasn't rooted in pacifism, but nonviolence. There's a difference. Nonviolent resistance is an active political force. It's also difficult and risky. John Lewis and the people who joined him on that bridge in Selma knew there would be a good chance they'd get their heads bashed in. But they also knew that those images might convince the people watching at home to support their cause. And they did. And that's because nonviolence is a political strategy designed to persuade, to win the perpetual battle for hearts and minds. It is the foundation of democracy. And over the last 100 years, it has been far more effective than violent conflict in bringing down repressive regimes. It's not even close. I keep hearing people say there's no place in this country for political violence, which, sure, but it's more than that. The very purpose of politics is to figure out a way to live together without violence. The killer said, "Some hate can't be negotiated out." Sure, maybe that's true. But just because politics has failed in the past to prevent violence, just because it seems to be failing now, doesn't mean that we should give up on it. That we should give up on speaking and acting and fighting in a way that represents our best attempt to change people's minds, to bring the rest of the country a little bit closer to our point of view. I'm obviously biased on this point because that is what we're trying to do here at Crooked. It's what I've tried to do for most of my life. But I think we're right. And we would love for you to join us. And now, here's Will Sommer. Will, welcome back to Offline.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start today talking about who Charlie Kirk was and what he meant to the MAGA movement. I'm very familiar with his work. You certainly are. But I feel like some of our listeners, particularly listeners who are not in his target demographic, may not quite understand how important he was to the MAGA movement and to MAGA media. You wrote last week, "More than anyone else with the surname Trump, Kirk is the figure whose rise best illustrates the changing of the American right." Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Kirk was a guy who really came from obscurity over his 13 years in politics. He's someone who started kind of a young Rush Limbaugh fan who decided to try to adapt that kind of mix of entertainment and politics to his generation. And he launched Turning Point USA a little before Trump ran for office as sort of a campus, a young people conservative group. And then ultimately sort of amassed this real empire in a way of sort of organizing and get out the vote, as well as kind of like a media empire with his podcast and talk radio show. And so he was sort of a unique figure even within the right. I mean, obviously we're used to these kind of right-wing media figures who also play in politics. But he was a confidant of the Trump family. He raised millions and millions of dollars. He had a huge staff behind him, as well as a big media microphone. So he was a very influential guy and had really sort of was almost like a surrogate for the Trump family in terms of what they would and wouldn't allow in the MAGA movement. Yeah,
it did seem to me from the outside that there are some MAGA media types and influencers who are, I guess, for lack of a better word, very establishment, because now MAGA is the establishment of the party. And then there are some who will, sort of say their own thing, disagree with the president once in a while here and there. And it seemed like Kirk was very much within the MAGA establishment.
Yeah, I mean, the moment that springs to mind is over the summer when the DOJ tried to close the Epstein case. And people like Charlie Kirk, Megyn Kelly, they went out there and they were like, look, we love Trump, but even we want answers. And that lasted about 3 or 4 days. And then Trump calls Charlie Kirk and says, cut it out. It's over. And then Charlie Kirk comes back that Monday and says, I'm sick of talking about Epstein. We're moving on.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about Turning Point USA, which Kirk started in 2012 when he was 18. Can you talk about the founding of that organization and specifically how it differed from other Republican youth organizations of that time period?
Yeah, I mean, Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk had a real gift even as a very young man for raising a lot of money and sort of getting donors to see these kind of elderly donors, usually to see him as sort of a beloved nephew or grandson who could adapt conservatism in kind of a more entertaining. And, I hesitate to say cool here because I'm not saying like these like are the coolest, I think, to the average young person. But for young people who are at all interested in politics, I mean, they were able to brand it as, I think, a much more lively and a contemporary kind of answer to what it is to be a young conservative. I mean, some of its rival organizations like the Young America's Foundation, Americans for Freedom, they were just, it's a lot of blazers. It's very CPAC look. It's kind of Alex P. Keaton. Whereas you look at what Turning Point USA created, and it was these conferences where there would be some kind of like mini scandal often about like a hookup or a fight. If you look at like Benny Johnson giving his speeches, there's pyrotechnics. I mean, in a lot of it's the images that TPUSA has used to memorialize Charlie, he's surrounded by like big fireworks or explosions. And that really was the vibe that it was, usually in like Miami or like some Sunbelt kind of fun city to visit. And so in that way, I think it just made the idea of like kind of being a conservative foot soldier and operative seem like a lot more enticing of a lifestyle than it had been.
And when did he start the college debates, going to college campuses and debating? And when did that whole thing come about? And how did it come about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was right around when Trump started running for office, around like 2016, 2015. And, he wasn't the only person to have done this stuff. I mean, people may remember the big meme with Steven Crowder sitting at the table saying, change my mind or prove me wrong. But really, it sort of became Charlie Kirk's signature tactic, I guess. And, look, he would go to these debates. This would produce these media moments of, Charlie Kirk owns blue-haired social justice warrior. And it's something that I think particularly in the first Trump administration, we saw a lot of kind of conservatives sort of poking these progressive universities by showing up on campus. Steven Crowder, Milo Yiannopoulos, people like that. But I would say it was really sort of became Charlie Kirk's thing most famously.
I've heard from some folks on the left who, criticizing people who said that they were just, he's just a good debater who's just go out there and just hold these debates. And that was, sort of upholding free speech, that the debates were, to put it politely, advantageous for Kirk in the way they were set up. Is there truth to that? Or what was it about the format of the debates that always had him sort of owning the libs?
Well, I mean, it's sort of like any talk radio show or anything. I mean, this is a guy, he has the mic, his staff controls access to the mics. He's in the position of power. And again, I mean, this is a guy who is not always taking on, professional debaters like himself. I mean, these are often college students who are nervous, in front of all their peers or anything. But I do think, a lot of the footage that has, resurfaced after the assassination shows him, it's not like, screaming at these kids, often coming off as empathetic. But of course, I mean, ultimately, like the point there was I think not to have him get owned, by college students, but rather it was to sort of embolden conservative students, win over independents, and I think also to kind of create these social media friendly moments.
You, I think, noted last week that Kirk also helped lay the groundwork for Trump to really embrace the manosphere in the 2024 election. How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Kirk was, in the aftermath of the assassination, I think it's become clear that he was a guy who was known not just within political media, but was sort of a figure and sort of a meme in his own way outside of that. I mean, he was very big on TikTok. He would go on these podcasts that are sort of apolitical, like bros hanging out, cultural podcasts. And so in that way, I mean, I think that both expanded his brand, but it also sort of showed the way for people like Trump, J.D. Vance, that there was an advantage in reaching out to these groups that, frankly, I mean, I think we're not really engaged, ready to give him the most scrutiny of his talking points. But he was obviously someone I think who came across well on video, on podcasts.
Our friend Peter Hamby wrote a piece about how he was, recognized on college campuses and mentioned that Generation Lab found that Kirk was almost universally known among college kids. 94% of students had heard of him, which is just, as Peter notes, a remarkable level of name ID for any political figure. And then the next set of data is most college students were not fans. A combined 70% of students said they were either strongly disagree or somewhat disagree with Kirk's views. Only 30% said they agreed. Does that feel right from your sort of reporting, both on the name ID and sort of the split on the college campuses?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, as you said, that's an enormous amount of name recognition, for anyone to
Shocking
achieve,
to
particularly
me. Yeah.
Someone who is sort of otherwise sort of a conservative activist and sort of debate figure, but to be that well known. And I think he's also, someone who recognized, like Trump, that, even bad attention can redound to your benefit. I mean, this is a guy whose organization went through a lot of like real high profile disasters initially. There was this protest where students dressed up in a diaper to sort of symbolize crybaby liberals. And a lot of like the operatives within TPUSA turned out to be racist. That this would kind of resurface these like racist text messages and stuff. But again, I mean, he kept building this organization. And I think he also, frankly, was a guy who, like, I think a lot of liberals saw as annoying, kind of this, maybe like a pipsqueak, kind of, although a very tall guy, but to sort of this kind of this kind of nerd type, perhaps. And I think a lot of people didn't take him seriously on the left. And I think we saw with the most recent Trump election, by then Turning Point USA had grown into this real behemoth politically. And
did he have rivalries within the MAGA movement or across the right?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really emerging after this assassination, and in particular, just in the past few days, is he was not seen as like a universally beloved figure before his death. And I think, in the aftermath, obviously people were, I think, of all types were mourning him and upset by his murder. But, it's also worth noting that, he was seen as, again, a very establishment figure who's going to run sort of with whatever the Trump line was for the most part. And then, Nick Fuentes, the white nationalist podcaster, I think would be his kind of most famous foil. Someone who's almost I described him earlier today as sort of just a more evil Charlie Kirk. I mean, he's obviously a more racist, anti-Semitic. He was at Charlottesville, but both like very young guys who were these kind of podcasters and who had their own sort of audiences and fan base. And, this sort of climaxed in, I believe, 2019, when Charlie Kirk had said he was very open to, anyone who graduates from an American university from another country should get a green card to stay. And so this is a very kind of like Jeb Bushian model of immigration, or Mitt Romney. And Nick Fuentes, of course, who's a racist, said, this is awful. We're taking people from India, et cetera. And so his fans start crashing Turning Point events, and Turning Point, like Dan Crenshaw, is getting shouted down, and Turning Point turned out to basically have no way to stop this. And so instead, Charlie Kirk, I think, made this decision to basically say, okay, well, I'm going to become much more hawkish on immigration. Up to this year, he's saying there needs to be a ban on even legal immigration from the third world, which, I think we can read as non-white countries. So he was very much also, I would say, like a player who was sort of shifting with the wind and subject to the same dynamics that, any other right-wing media figure is.
Yeah, I noticed that too, in sort of looking back on his journey on the right, which is that he, I don't know if he became more radicalized, but he certainly more mirrored some of his now most famous rhetoric that's been going around. Certainly mirrored the far right more than it did, I think, earlier in his career.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who came up originally as sort of a Tea Party, young Republican, a Marco Rubio-ian figure. Yeah. And I think he recognized that, Trump was the direction the party was headed in. And, he could have stood against that and probably, had his organization dwindle into irrelevance. Or, he obviously decided to get very close with the Trump family. And I think in particular, his tone in the second Trump administration, I think like the Republican Party in general, became much harsher, much more hawkish.
So I want to talk about the aftermath of the assassination, especially the reaction from the right. We are recording this a week after the assassination. What do you make of the rage and declarations of war coming from MAGA influencers and media figures and politicians as well on the right, compared to other moments like Butler or 2020?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like the level of rage in this desire for revenge is really, really high. And I'd say like even more so than Butler or perhaps even the election loss in 2020. Although, they did January 6th then, right? So
right.
I think there's a real desire for revenge. I'm seeing people say there's a lot of kind of distractions going on. I think the right is a little unclear about which direction it wants to go in. I feel like there's sort of a sense almost of, I think they really wanted the suspect to turn out to be like a blue-haired social justice warrior type. And even though, we're seeing these police statements, these messages that suggest, he was coming from some sort of like LGBT rights point of view from what we've seen so far, I think it's still like a little muddled, that people seem kind of mad about it. And so to that effect, we're seeing people like Steve Bannon, a lot of really prominent Republican figures say, there has to be more to this story. The FBI has to be covering something up. Nevertheless, I think the Trump administration is very focused on the goal here, which is using this as sort of a pretext to do some kind of like Viktor Orban style crushing of left-wing institutions.
And it does seem like they were planning that long before this happened. And I mean, I guess I think Stephen Miller said that like Charlie Kirk's last text to him was, you got to go after these radical left NGOs or something to that effect.
There's a lot of people who are saying, Charlie Kirk's last wish to me was insert my policy goal, here. But you're right. I mean, even before this happened, obviously the Trump administration was going after universities or liberal law firms, things like this, cowing media companies. But I do think here that they really see an opportunity. I mean, we saw Pam Bondi saying, we're going to have hate crimes. We're going to pursue these hate crimes. So I think there's this effort. It's still a little vague at this point. I mean, we're seeing people even kind of emerging from right-wing media to say like, well, I've come up with a way that you could go after George Soros. We saw JD Vance complaining he's going to pursue whoever funds The Nation magazine because they wrote an unflattering article about Charlie Kirk. I mean, so I think it's still really early days in terms of what they would get up to, but I mean, it's obviously very disturbing the language they're using.
Offline is brought to you by Quince. Cooler temps are rolling in, and as always, Quince is where you can turn for fall staples that actually last. From cashmere to denim to boots, the quality holds up and the price will blow you away. Quince has the kind of fall staples you're going to wear nonstop. They got super soft Mongolian cashmere sweaters starting at just $60. Their denim is durable, fits right. Their real leather jackets bring that clean classic edge without the elevated price tag. And the thing about Quince is they partner directly with ethical factories and skip the middlemen, so you can get top tier fabrics and craftsmanship at half the price of similar brands. Have shopped at Quince many times now. Go online to try to, I got a bunch of summer clothes. Now I'm trying to figure out fall clothes, maybe get some sweaters, getting a little chilly. At least maybe that's aspirational. It's not quite chilly yet, but I'm assuming at some point it'll be somewhat chilly in Los Angeles and I will need a sweater and maybe I'll even need a jacket. So Quince is where I go for all that stuff because it is affordable, but it's also really comfy and it looks really great. Keep it classic and cool this fall with long-lasting supplies from Quince. Go to quince.com/offline for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/offline. Free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/offline. Offline is brought to you by Cook Unity. I love Cook Unity. I was excited when I saw that Cook Unity is sponsoring this podcast because I've been a Cook Unity subscriber for a couple years now. Basically, you go online, they got all of these different chefs who come up with new meals every week. There's like 300 and something meals to choose from. So the variety is fantastic. It's fresh. You just put it in the oven to reheat it, or you can put it in the microwave, whatever you want. And there's a lot of healthy choices. There's a lot of choices for people who are who just want different, whether you want like a lot of protein or carbs, or you want something healthy, or you want some comfort food. Cook Unity is wonderful. I've done a lot of these different meal services in the past, and Cook Unity is by far my favorite. So just so you know, meals are delivered fully cooked. Just heat up in as little as 5 minutes. You can choose from a rotating seasonal menu of over 300 meals, or you can let Cook Unity provide personalized recommendations. Menus are updated weekly. New chefs are always joining the team, so meals will never be boring or repetitive. And commitment-free subscriptions start as low as $11 a meal. Skip deliveries, pause, or cancel anytime. Fuel your day with the freshest, best tasting meal delivery made by award-winning chefs. Go to cookunity.com/offline-free or enter code offline-free before checkout for free premium meals for life. That's free. Oh, that's good. Let me tell you, the premium meals usually on the Cook Unity site, you pay a little extra for them in addition to your subscription because they're premium. It's like filet mignon and stuff like that. But if you use code OFFLINEFREE, you will get free premium meals for life. That is a great deal. That's free premium meals for life by using code OFFLINEFREE or going to cookunity.com/offlinefree. I was talking about the Bannon thing again because it was interesting to me, once they read the texts yesterday when they charged him between the killer and his romantic partner. And then they, put out the charging document. It was the evidence is there for everyone to see. There's a little bit of a horseshoe theory thing going on where like there are some folks on the left who are like the texts aren't real. They doctored the texts. And then you also got that from Steve Bannon and some folks on the right that they're not real because they want it to be, the right wants it to be a larger conspiracy than just one person. And the left doesn't, want it to be someone who has, progressive views on LGBT issues. Can you talk about some of the other conspiracies? Well, also that conspiracy, but also some of the other conspiracies on the right that have popped up around Charlie Kirk's assassination, because I also know there's like an Israel thing going on.
Yeah, the Israel thing is really hot right now. Basically, I think the key thing to understand here is that the support for Israel is sort of like maybe along with Jeffrey Epstein, although even that is kind of fading away. I think a lot of young Republicans have kind of decided that they're cool with hiding what's ever in the files about Trump. But I think that Israel is sort of like the dividing line in sort of the young MAGA movement and in right-wing media more broadly. And so you're seeing even initially after the assassination, there were people saying, whose issue is, they're always critical of Israel. And they're saying, well, maybe it was the Mossad. It looked like a professional hit, whatever. But now we're seeing, and I'm writing about this in my newsletter. I mean, it's sort of in the past few days, it's become sort of an omni feud. It's like the right is a flame. I mean, Charlie Kirk, as far as I know, hasn't even been buried. We haven't had the funeral. And yet we're seeing this just like there's this scrabbling for control of his legacy. And so you see people like Candace Owens, who is friends with him and is very anti-Semitic. You're seeing Tucker Carlson, who's very critical of Israel. Megyn Kelly, who's like weirdly, I think she sees which way the wind is blowing and she's jumped on the Israel critical train. They're all saying, Charlie was getting mad about Israel. He was starting to voice his concerns. And then these donors, Tucker Carlson was saying these donors were really giving him heat. They wanted Tucker Carlson banned from Turning Point conferences. I mean, and that's true. But there's like a huge amount of drama related to like, what does the legacy of Charlie Kirk really mean? Who has a claim to it? And really, I mean, also who's going to control Turning Point USA?
Right. I mean, but I think Tommy brought this up on Pod Save America, but the conspiracies about Israel being involved reached such a fever pitch that like Netanyahu was asked about it. Yeah,
Netanyahu was asked about it and he said, it's ridiculous. I mean, there's also like a weird thing at play here where the Netanyahu is like incredibly involved in the American right-wing podcast scene. And so he's like meeting with people like Tim Pool. He clearly cares it's like you're launching military attacks in all these different countries. Yeah. And you're meeting with the Nelk boys. In this case, Tucker Carlson seems to have been very offended that Netanyahu talked about, Charlie Kirk's devotion to Israel and felt that, the Kirk legacy was being hijacked. I mean, Carlson brought this up with JD Vance when they were like kind of filling in on the Charlie Kirk show, or JD Vance was. And so, I mean, this is like a really live issue. Bill Ackman's been pulled into it because Candace Owens has claimed he was threatening Charlie Kirk over Israel. So and again, I mean, we are talking a week after this shocking, bloody assassination. And so I think there are a lot of people on the right who are sort of shocked by like the scrabbling for advantage that's already taking place.
One other thing that's happening on the right after Trump and Vance and Bondi have all come out and said they're doing this crackdown is much like after when the Epstein thing blew up, you have some people, some MAGA figures saying, what is this attack on free speech? I don't like this. And criticizing Bondi for it. How do you see that? Is that like do you think that has some staying power? Do you think it'll be like Epstein where, a week later when they just go after some left-wing free speech, they're going to be like, oh no, that's okay. We're back on board. Or do you think there are figures on the right who are so deeply invested in free speech that they are going to continue criticizing this administration?
I think it may be like the Epstein thing in that I think some qualms will continue to persist for sort of the Trumpian grassroots or conservatives or sort of Trump-leaning independents, people who are saying, this isn't really what America was about. On the other hand, I think these right-wing media figures, like with Epstein, will fall in line. They're really thirsty for some kind of like a show trial or some kind of crackdown that destroys at least a couple, liberal nonprofits, something like that. I think Pam Bondi's mistake was phrasing it in a way that Republicans have been taught to fear hate crime laws or hate speech laws. And so they said, whoa, wait, that's about us maybe. Whereas, one Maha guy I follow, I thought it was funny. He was saying, whoa, hate speech. Let's not talk. That's not American. We want purges. We want roundups. They are seeing, they want like there's like, it's like that's a trigger phrase for them. And they don't like that. They want things like, we saw Laura Loomer say, Trump said he wants to be dictator. And I think, that might be a good idea. There's a sense that they have a lot of political capital, but there's a bit of a disagreement about how to use it.
When Vance was hosting Charlie Kirk's podcast, he said, quote, "It's a statistical fact that most of the lunatics in American politics today are proud members of the far left." You're an expert in extremism. Does it seem like a statistical fact?
As someone who has made his career covering many people who that could be classified as lunatics, I would say the right has more than its fair share.
Yeah, I did think it was interesting when he went on to say, sure, we have some crazies on our side of the aisle. Of course we do. I was going to be like, someone should ask him a follow-up on that one. See if he can say anyway.
I think someone pointed out that, amid this Republican complaint about, calling Donald Trump Nazis, et cetera, that J.D. Vance obviously once, I believe, called Trump a Nazi or Hitler before making his MAGA turn.
Sure did. And RFK Jr., I think, too. So we're learning more about the shooter. We learned some from authorities on Tuesday. I think there was some thought on the left early on that the killer might be part of the Groyper Movement. This does not seem to be the case now, but just for people to understand this, what is a Groyper? Where did these theories come from? Which are now, I think, gone, but who knows?
Yeah, I hope this day would never come that I would have to explain to the offline audience what a Groyper is. Groyper, so people remember Pepe the Frog.
Yeah.
So followers of Nick Fuentes and sort of general like Gen Z racists online around 2018, they got sort of a version of Pepe the Frog who was like a fatter toad, and he would hold his kind of look like this. He would sort of suspend his hands looking very smug. And that's Groyper. And so they started to call themselves Groypers. And so the idea is you're a hardcore Nick Fuentes follower. And as I mentioned, there was this thing where Nick Fuentes, up until the assassination, Nick Fuentes was very critical of Charlie Kirk. He was saying, this guy is a real nemesis of the Groypers. And so after the assassination, I think a lot of people on the left, not unreasonably, I think thought, well, maybe it was a Groyper. But really, there's really no evidence of that. People point to this, how he dressed up as this Slavic squat meme, and people say, well, that's a Pepe thing. It's not really a Pepe thing. You can really get into the weeds on that, but I really just, even before we saw the messages between the roommate and the suspect, I really just think there's basically zero evidence. And I think it was a lot of, look, I don't blame people on the left for like really hoping, after this happened, that it was someone on the right, because we're seeing the Trump administration use this as a pretext to seemingly criminalize like half of politics. But, I do think, having gone through the evidence we have, I just don't think it's there.
And the engravings on the bullets, that was another thing that people were trying to go one way or the other, or trying to figure out ideology. What do you know? Groyper or not, what do you know from sort of your coverage of these right-wing spaces, whether it's on Discord, whether it's gamers, wherever else, where the places are where they overlap with either, far left views, or maybe just people who are nihilist in nature or anarchists? Like, what are the corners of the internet where you might find people who it may be hard to tell what their actual ideological alliance is?
Yeah, these are worlds that are very awash in memes, in irony, sort of triple, quadruple layers of irony. A lot of video game talk. For example, like some of the messages on the bullet casings were from the game Helldivers 2. Well, I think people took that, well, that's a Groyper favorite. I mean, that's like a popular game. I have that game. There's nothing sinister specifically about that game. And so I think, we're talking about like places like 4chan. Discord obviously has figured prominently here, which is sort of like Slack for people who are too young to have jobs, perhaps, and it's you chat with your gamer buddies. As we've seen from the chat logs from the Discord, the suspects Discord that have come out, it's a lot of kind of like just shooting the shit with your pals, and then suddenly this suspect says, by the way, I shot Charlie Kirk, and so I think a lot of the confusion about the suspect's motives, admittedly, there hasn't been a ton to go on, particularly up until the indictment yesterday. But I think a lot of the confusion, I think a lot of it is just kind of like young male internet culture in terms of the memes that I think are pretty inscrutable for people outside of it.
You mentioned this earlier, but I just want to follow up before we go. What do you think happens to Turning Point? And is there some kind of inter-MAGA struggle for who takes over and the direction it heads? Or
this is like maybe like the biggest issue facing right-wing media and even the Trump administration, for the next couple months. I mean, I think obviously there's been understandably an effort there's been a lot of focus on Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica Kirk. There's no like clear successor. I mean, there are people who sort of came up under him, like Benny Johnson, Candace Owens, although she's not coming back, but she's almost, as I said, she's kind of doing her own parallel claim to his legacy. But I think ultimately, we're talking about millions of dollars, tons of young activists. And I think a lot is going to shake out. I'm hearing grumblings about this big stadium memorial service, who's getting speaking engagements, whatever. But I think, to be frank, I think there's a possibility that this organization is kind of adrift, and, perhaps some donors are going to step up and assert it. But a lot of that, it's like you can have a lot of money, but are you going to bring that Charlie Kirk audience? Are you going to have that credibility? And the last thing I would add here is like it's very closely watched who is getting close to Turning Point in the aftermath here. For example, Ben Shapiro broadcast from Charlie Kirk's studio earlier this week with kind of the Daily Wire gang. And obviously he's very pro-Israel. And so this has been taken as a sign of, oh no, Israel's taking over Turning Point USA. We saw Marjorie Taylor Greene, insane. She says, this is a Christian organization. We can't allow another religion to take it over. There's a lot of, I'm going on here, but like there's a lot of religion stuff at play here too, specifically because Charlie Kirk was a Protestant. And so you have Candace Owens really randomly basically saying not only was he about to become critical of Israel, but he was also really close to converting to Catholicism. And so, there's this Jewish aspect as well. And so there's just like a lot of tension and kind of back and forth about what it meant to be Charlie Kirk and what he would have wanted.
Yeah, look, I put this the right way. Obviously, a lot of the people in that movement who knew Charlie Kirk and were close to him are devastated by this. It also seems like it's only been a week, and this assassination is being seen by many people on the right and within the MAGA movement as a way to, like you said, stake their claim to his legacy or do something that they had wanted to do previously, or make a point and an argument they were trying to make previously. And it makes me wonder about like how the legacy plays out and sort of like the staying power of the sort of unified rage that they feel right now.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people on the right who would prefer to see this used as some kind of quasi-fascist crackdown, who are getting very frustrated with the Israel critics who are saying, like, this is our chance to arrest George Soros or something on some pretext, and you guys are making it about Gaza and Netanyahu, and you're kind of like taking oxygen out of our scheme. This is, and people are saying this like quite explicitly. They're like, this is our chance to crush the left. What are you doing? Ultimately, I think this can seem a little kind of factional and like, why are we so focused on these internecine fights? But this is a lot of this is the Trump administration. A lot of this is sort of the future of politics here. And so I think you have these big personalities bumping up against each other in this like incredibly emotionally charged moment.
Will Sommer, your reporting on this is excellent as always. Thanks for coming by. False Flag is your newsletter. Everyone should go subscribe at The Bulwark and do a lot of great stuff there as well. So thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Will Sommer, for joining. And after the break, my producer Austin joins so I can answer some of your questions. Hey, offline listeners. Do you love watching Crooked's podcasts on video but hate ads? We've got great news. You can now stream ad-free video with a paid subscription to Crooked. Enjoy shows like this one, Pod Save America, Love It or Leave It, and Pod Save the World with no interruptions, just the content you actually came for. And yes, subscribing means more Dan Pfeiffer, which is what everyone wants. You'll get his exclusive show, Polar Coaster, where he delivers sharp takes on the intersection of politics, polls, and media spin. Best of all, you can help support progressive media that exposes lies, battles misinformation, and pushes back against conservatives who are trying to control the conversation. Ad-free video is available now on Supercast, Substack, and YouTube. Visit cricket.com/friends to learn more. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Who do you go to in order to solve your life's problems? The group chat, oversharing with strangers. I definitely overshare with strangers. I do that on this microphone many times a week. So that's. I mean, I guess you guys can't talk back to me, so that's different than therapy. I do go to the group chat. That's helpful too. But you know what? I also go to a therapist because it's nice to just have someone whose job it is to sit and listen to you talk and not be annoyed with you. Or at least not show that they're annoyed at you for talking about your problems. And it always feels good when you leave. At least I always feel good. And again, there's a lot of people, you don't think you need therapy. I didn't think I needed therapy. I was like 40 years old first time I went. And it wasn't because something big happened in my life, because I was just like, yeah, I should probably go talk to someone. And you know what? I've been going ever since, and I love it. BetterHelp therapists work according to a strict code of conduct and are fully licensed in the US. BetterHelp does the initial matching work for you so you can focus on your therapy goals. A short questionnaire helps identify your needs and preferences, and their 10 plus years of experience and industry-leading match fulfillment rate means they typically get it right the first time. If you aren't happy with your match, switch to a different therapist at any time from their tailored recs. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp's the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. It's convenient too. You can join a session with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Find the one with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/offline. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/offline. Offline is brought to you by Smalls. In today's political climate, one thing's certain: your cat is running a dictatorship. And their first executive order, they want our next sponsor, Smalls, for every meal. Smalls cat food is protein-packed recipes made with preservative-free ingredients you'd find in your fridge, and it's delivered right to your door. That's why Cats.com named Smalls their best overall cat food. To get 60% off your first order plus free shipping, head to smalls.com/offline for a limited time only. Here's a review from a real Smalls customer. Elizabeth C. said, "My cat was always so-so with her usual food, but she's very enthusiastic about Smalls. Her breath is much better, and she poops much less frequently, and it does not smell disgusting like it used to." Congrats, Elizabeth C. Smalls works with the Humane World for Animals. They've donated over $1 million worth of food to help cats, and they even give you a chance to donate at checkout, whether you donate $5 for flea and tick medications or $7 for vaccines. Now you can add other cat favorites like amazing treats and snacks to your Smalls order. The team at Smalls is so confident your cat will love their product that you can try it risk-free. That means they'll refund you if your cat won't eat their food. What are you waiting for? Give your cat the food they deserve for a limited time only because you are an Offline with John Favreau listener. You can get 60% off your first Smalls order plus free shipping when you head to smalls.com/offline. That's 60% off when you head to smalls.com/offline plus free shipping. Again, that's smalls.com/offline.
John, do you want to tell us what we're doing here real quick?
We're answering some questions.
We're answering a couple of questions.
Love to answer questions.
So basically, after the Will Sommer conversation, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions.
Mm-hmm.
I had asked some questions in the Discord just to kind of get your take of how you are feeling in our new political environment. So I just want to start with last week and then again today on this show. You started both of the shows saying that one of the reasons you've been so shaken up about the killing of Charlie Kirk is that he spoke to people who cared about politics and then organized them, which is the work that you are also doing. It's the work that we do here at Crooked Media. I'm just curious, like, overall, how has this changed just your approach to this work? How are you feeling overall? Are you anxious? Like, do things feel different in this new environment for you?
Yeah, I started anxious and worried. And then as the week has progressed, I have become angrier and frustrated would be the new. And
in particular with anyone?
Well, angry at this government, right? Angry at the Trump administration, infuriated that they are using this as a very flimsy pretext to launch a crackdown. And so I think, like I think this was already planned, but I think this is accelerating it in a big way. Frustrated, and I, obviously mentioned this in the open, but it's weird. I feel like when people don't justify violence or celebrate violence, because like I said, I have not encountered those people, thankfully, though I have seen them out there. But even think maybe violence is necessary soon, and I don't know.
Yeah.
And like, again, no one should be made to feel anything about Charlie Kirk that they don't already feel, right? Like that, your feelings are your feelings. So screw that debate. But like, we're trying to bring down an authoritarian regime.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to oppose them. We're trying to keep this country together. And some of the debates, some of the back and forth about violence and this and that, and it's just again, I'm not mad at the people. I'm not even frustrated with the people. I'm like frustrated with myself. And I was like, I feel like this is the core of what I have wanted to get across to people for so long, and clearly it is not working.
Yeah.
Which is why I tried to double down today.
After reading your intro before we jumped in here, I really wanted to ask, how much of the reaction, both on the left and on the right, are you attributing to like social media algorithms? It feels to me that this moment, more than any other moment, has really been dictated by our political discourse happening online rather than offline. I feel like even just 5 years ago, in like a pre-Elon Musk Twitter, like the reaction would not be this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel the same way?
Yes, and I think it's a key point, and thank you for bringing it up, because I've been thinking this week that we talk on this show so much about like the algorithms in social media and what it's doing to the discussion online, and our public debate is mediated through these platforms, and so the debate is a mess. But sometimes I worry that we leave people the impression that it is all just happening online.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, the reaction we're seeing, the murder itself, is a result of bad things that have been happening online for quite a while are now bleeding into real life and sort of changing people's perceptions of the world, of politics, of what is acceptable, of what is not acceptable. The one thing I didn't mention in the open that I probably meant to was that, and we mentioned it on PSA briefly, but I keep thinking about that G. Elliott Morris, who's a polling analyst, and he has a Substack, so you can check it out. But he talked about this study where you ask people, do you think political violence is justified? And then you get the answer. And then you say, okay, what percentage of the other party do you think believes political violence is justified? And they give their percentage, and they always overestimate what the percentage is on the other party. And the key is, when they know the information of just what percentage the other party actually believes in political violence, their penchant for political violence goes down. So part of the reason people think it's okay is because they think the other side wants it. Yeah. When in reality, we are spinning each other up because the only people we see on social media or on TV are the people who are, most extreme.
Yeah. You open this up talking about like turning down the heat on this rhetoric and pushing people back against political violence. We are seeing the president, the vice president, Stephen Miller, just kind of like accelerate and throw gasoline on a lot of this rhetoric. Do you think it's possible in this kind of like social media environment and without the support of the president to turn down this rhetoric right now? And like, what kind of work is it going to take from us to turn down the heat?
The reason that I focus so much on violence is because I think the turn the rhetoric down thing is bullshit. And I want to be honest. I think I have been. I do think this is an authoritarian regime. I think he has broken the law. I think he is violating the spirit of the Constitution, if not the letter of the Constitution. I am very concerned, and I do not think that saying those things is in any way sort of increasing the possibility for violence. But I think for all of us who believe that too, you have to be pretty clear, not just because of Charlie Kirk, what happened to Charlie Kirk, but always that we are facing an authoritarian threat. We believe that the best way to oppose it is through nonviolent resistance. Like, sounds maybe academic, maybe it sounds simple, maybe it sounds obvious to people. I think it is worth keeping that framework in your mind so that when you are saying things, posting things, whatever else, you can think, okay, does it fit within that framework of, nonviolent resistance? Okay, if it does, great.
What kind of nonviolent resistance do you want to see more of, like right now, from people? How do you want to see people get more active, not online, but like in real life?
I mean, I think, well, I'll start with online though, because I do think that, again, for better or worse, and we think worse, this is where our public debate is mediated online. I do think that everyone has a platform. Everyone has the ability to go online and make their opinions known and to talk to their friends, to talk to their social network. Mm-hmm. And I think that people who are also worried about the place we're in right now and who also don't want violence, but who have turned away from politics because for a number of really good reasons, I think it's a good time for those people to speak up. Good time for those people to speak. I know this now too. It's like, I'm talking about the people I've talked to who, had some things that disturb me. And I'm like, okay, even if it's not social media, even if it's just people reaching out to directly, it is, I am getting a sample size that may not be representative of where opinion in the country actually is. And I think partly that's because a lot of people who participated in politics in the past have been like, fuck it, I'm out. This is terrible. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I'm going to do something else.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not true, but if it is true, I would love those people to speak up and come back.
I've been thinking a lot about my experience at the No Kings protests a couple of weeks ago and just how that kind of released a lot of the anxiety I was feeling about this administration and how that anxiety is just coming back into my bloodstream these last couple of weeks and just looking for that type of action again, or just those kind of conversations with folks.
We didn't even I'm definitely more protests. I definitely think, when we talked to Erica Chenoweth about this on PSA, I think that, there's other tools, there's boycotts, there's strikes, right? Mm-hmm. Like that could be down the road. Basically, the point is there are a number of things that we can organize around and we should organize around before anyone starts talking about violence.
Absolutely. I got two more quick questions for you. One conversation that I was having with Saul, your Pots of America producer, before we jumped into this, was about the frenetic pace of the internet. He was mentioning to me that just it seems that so many stories that have happened online just become like our main point of focus for so long and then all of a sudden just disappear.
Yeah.
This is what happened with the Trump assassination attempt in Butler, where just 7 days later we weren't talking about it anymore. I'm just curious if this moment feels different to you or if this feels like something that might also just kind of get lost in the soup of our broken attention spans.
It's a great question. I think it's too early to know. I do see these moments as, at least in the second Trump term, that we forget about them, but they leave a mark. Mm-hmm. And I think that whether we're talking about this at all in a couple weeks from now or a month from now or wherever, the crackdown that they're promising, that will stay with us. I don't think that's something that they're just going to forget about. Yeah. Though maybe they will. Maybe they'll run up against a wall and realize that they can't do that much except yell and intimidate people, but who knows?
Kind of hope that happens.
Yeah.
I hate asking this question. I've produced for you for a long time and people kind of always make fun of the what gives you hope question, but I do think I'm feeling a lot of despair. I feel like a lot of people are feeling a lot of despair right now and they've been taking that out in a lot of different ways, but like what words of encouragement do you have for people listening that we can leave them with right now about this moment and where we can go from here?
Not much. No, like what should give you hope,
which is why we don't usually ask that question.
I really do believe though, like what should give you hope is your own agency. Like every single one of us has the capacity to put things out into the world that are positive and constructive and productive and could have the potential to move us closer to the day when we do not have to deal with this anymore. And the minute you think that you don't have that agency, that you don't have that capacity, that you're just feeling so helpless and you're in such despair and you're feeling not just cynical, but nihilistic, which is what I'm worried about now. I used to be worried about cynicism. Now I'm worried about nihilism with people. But once you let yourself get there, then there is no hope, right? But as long as you can tell yourself like, you know what, I'm going to wake up today and I'm going to read the news and then I'm going to figure out who can I persuade? How can I make people aware of what's going on? What can I do? And then, that is, like I said, no guarantee it works. I don't have optimism, but I do have hope, which is different. And hope is that we can still make change.
Hope is a hammer.
There we go.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Austin.